Hi, and welcome to the fourth in our series on how to trust your player. I'm Alan Ogilvie, Lead Product Manager at FriendMTS, and I'm here with two of my colleagues, Andy and Chris.
Hi, I'm Andy Wilson, Senior Product Architect at FriendMTS.
Hi Alan, I'm Chris O'Brien. I'm the Engineering Manager for our Asset OTT team here at FriendMTS.
Thanks for joining me. In our series so far, we've heard from Intertrust about how to protect streamed content as it's distributed to the consumer with DRM. And then we've heard about the best practices for implementation within the video player browser environment from Bitmovin. And now in the fourth article published this week, we here at FriendMTS discuss the importance of implementing readily accessible advanced watermarking techniques to protect content once it reaches the end user. Our operations investigations team see the extent of how pirates will go about getting hold of your content, so we understand the issues surrounding DRM workflows and the playback environments. That's why working together with Bitmovin and Intertrust helps all of our customers do better to protect their stuff. But there are a few things alongside these things that need to be addressed. So with that in mind, Andy, perhaps you can tell us a bit about what we expect in the chat today and what areas we've covered in the article.
Sure. So, I mean, obviously, it's really important to protect content once it reaches the consumer. So, if you look at earlier in our series, we've protected at the packaging stage, we've protected at the licensing stage, we've protected or made the player as robust as possible within the browser environment. But there's also an area past the browser environment which isn't typically protected, and that's at the edge of the glass going to your human user. And obviously, that's where a lot of the risk comes into play with an OTT service and obviously end user piracy. So a few things that we're going to cover in this session. Obviously, we're going to cover the importance of DRM as the very first step, and also where that can sometimes fall short within the consumer experience. We're going to talk about how some of the watermarking technologies work. We're going to look at also, a complementary service to watermarking, an essential complementary service to watermarking, which is the pairing of monitoring and detection services. And obviously, we'll look at, what streaming services should look for within a watermarking vendor.
So I think that's a good place to start. Let's start with the watermarking, where the watermarking comes into play. How does it work with DRM and other playback security measures? Perhaps, Chris, you could help us with that.
Yeah, sure. So obviously DRM and other playback protections, like stopping people sharing credentials on your service, should be the default first step, and we recommend that to our customers. But DRM only really protects content up until the material has started playing. So the main issue is that DRM protects the legitimate part from the origin server to the point of consumption. But it doesn't do much or very little for us to actually isolate who is pirating this content and how we identify them. The ones making it freely available, I should say. You can have a look at our Beyond DRM blog series for more information.
So in order to protect content, once it is outside legitimate legal boundaries, you need watermarking to identify it. Andy, perhaps you can walk us through where that fits in.
Okay, sure. So a watermark is essentially information that's embedded into the video stream. This can be as a sidecar piece of data, or it can actually be physically embedded within the video itself. Now, the watermark is typically implemented either at the point of origin, so prior to delivery of the CDN to the CDN, either during the end user delivery cycle at the CDN level, or laterally, composited as part of the playback experience, at the glass before it goes to the end user. Now, the kind of information that you'd typically embed within the watermark is something as simple as a authenticated user session identifier, and that way you can track a user session. Or it could be IP address information or client device information, but the packages that you're able to embed are fairly small, or rather the data payload is fairly small. So something like a session identifier for an authenticated and authorized user is the most appropriate thing to use. The watermarks themselves are normally imperceptible. So there are variants where you can have on-screen graphics, but usually they are kind of mathematically complex pieces of data that are embedded into the video in an imperceptible way. And you can think of this, the kind of pattern, it's something a bit like a QR code that's generated based upon the session ID and is then blended in with your video. So with something like client composited watermarking, obviously the detection time is very, very fast. I mean, it can take as little as a few seconds. And that's really, really important where you have a live sporting event that's running at scale. And you need to be able to embed watermarks in real time to enable low latency delivery of the streams out to your end users, but also gives you a wide range of flexible options as to how you embed that watermark, and opens up the possibilities of delivering watermark out to multiple devices in a personalized way at mass scale. So we recently released a white paper all around the various different watermarking technologies that are available in market, and more importantly, certain attack vectors which challenge use of those technologies. Well worth taking a look at that. So if you head to friendmts.com, you will find links there. And there's also a quick fact sheet which has some brief information about the various different watermarking technologies available in market.
So recent articles on watermarking technology suggest it is becoming more widely implemented, but this won't accomplish the goal of protecting content on its own. So you need to monitor for pirated content, as you said. Identify stolen material through the watermark and take action. Andy, perhaps you can give us more detail about this.
Yeah, sure. So, it comes down to three things. Detecting pirated content, deterring attacks in the first place, and then obviously disabling the illicit streams when they're found. So I can elaborate on that a bit more. Detecting in our parlance means, monitoring suspect pirate sites or, for discussion forums or online groups, looking for material that we think is suspect, and then matching that material with fingerprints that we have, looking at a digital fingerprint, calculating if there is a match between the content and where there is a match of the content or a likely match of the content, taking the distributed material and then putting that through an extraction process to obtain the watermark. And obviously through that watermark, we can then identify session information, etc. So we can then actually use that information to further down the process, disable that source of piracy. Determine comes down to essentially defending against these attacks. So it's having a robust delivery chain, but it's also making sure that you have a robust watermark in place that reduces the chance that pirates could potentially disable the watermark or corrupt the watermark. And one of the technologies, client composited, is something that's proven to be exceptionally robust to those kind of attacks and can evolve with technology as we have this game of cat and mouse with the pirates. And then lastly, the key aspect is disabling the source of that content being leaked. So this can either be taking direct action against a pirate once we've found information or found that the content is from a reputable source. It could be capturing session information, obviously from a watermark, and then using that to shut down the source of the original streams. And then obviously passing on session information and author information from the original OTT provider across to law enforcement for them to take action as well.
So it's clear that watermarking and monitoring are needed, but how should streaming services select a partner for content protection? What are the factors they should consider in their watermarking service?
Yeah, there's a few main things that OTT players should look into for a watermarking service. The first one I'd say is deployment. Experience really does count here. Picking a partner whose watermarking technology is widely deployed ensures that you're getting a service with a proven, demonstrable track record. The next 2 points I'm going to mention, Andy's already mentioned before, but I'd like to highlight these. The first being robustness against attacks. OTT players really need to know the watermarking service they select can stand up to the ever-changing piracy attacks that we see. Things like collusion and stuff with multiple sources. FriendMTS's asset service, our advanced subscriber ID, has remained secure against every attack we've seen in the wild against this. The next one, once again, as Andy said, is speed. There's no point having a live stream if it takes you longer than the stream to find it. So getting there within seconds or minutes to be able to take that down is really, really important. There's global reach as well. You need to protect your content around the world. Piracy doesn't know physical borders, even if you're just streaming in one country. And then the last one I'd like to say is about a multi-CDN service. They need to consider how watermarking technologies could be deployed in a multi-CDN environment, because it is possible to find services that incur additional expenses for this. At FriendMTS, we've been around for 2 decades now, and our asset service has proven to reduce piracy. A wee anecdote for you here, Alan. Several years ago in the UK, a major broadcaster, which was the original source for about 60%, I think, of sports channel piracy in its market, introduced ACID. OTT piracy reduced to less than 1% within weeks. We are quite proud of that.
So we should be. So one of the things that I've always enjoyed about this How to Trust Your Player series is that we started it by pointing out that the term player doesn't just mean the technical aspects, the video player, the DRM, but also the human factor. How does one trust the subscriber, the legitimate services end user? After all, they could be the source of piracy, right? Is there anything we can do alongside the technical protections we've put in place, creating our OTT service around this, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it sounds harsh, but it's essential to start at a position of zero trust. Mm-hmm. You have to assume that some of your users in your service will attempt to do something as basic as circumventing security controls, or use your service in a way that you didn't intend. This could mean something as simple as sharing credentials with family or friends, or it could mean something more complex as a direct attack against any of your content security systems, bypassing licensing restrictions or bypassing geo restrictions, etc. And obviously, to overcome this challenge, you've got to understand that at that point of zero trust, it begins from the point where you sign up your users to the service. Protection steps to include validation of any user profile, location checks on the user, payment fraud checks on the cards, etc., and to tally up user sign up data with the payment data to ensure that someone isn't actually trying to sign up for your service either using stolen materials or is trying to circumvent any potential geo controls that you have.
So these are errant or undesired behaviors, right? I think we can call them that. Maybe you can give us an idea about how those users of the system could be monitored to give additional insights into this risk. Probably best not to go through them all here. Obviously, there's more in the full article. Yeah, I mean, obviously in the article, we've got 6 or 7 points which we raise around the different profiles of users and the impacts that they can have on your service. Running an OTC service is very expensive, and the cost of delivering compressed video out to your consumers is one of the most costly aspects of the service. And even with high competition out there for the end user delivery components, the CDN, even with that competition that's out there in the market, it's still one of the most expensive aspects out there. So something as simple as your models, where you've looked at how long user sessions will be in play for, how long people will typically view a live stream for, a live channel for. This all matters, because if you suddenly have a swathe of your users consuming or over consuming that content, then that has a material impact on your bottom line, as it costs you to deliver that material over to those users. So what we call the over consumer is someone, whether that be a single user or multiple users in a household, actually consuming far more content than you originally modeled. Now, if that's a small subset of your user base, that's probably fine. If it's a much larger subset of your user base, then that can really start to impact revenue. Another one here is someone who's potentially sharing accounts. So, and obviously, if I go and share my credentials to an OTT service with my family, in my household, that's
typical usage model, where you have multiple streams available within a single household, to multiple devices that are registered within that single household. But if you share those credentials outside of that household, then that can become a really big problem, because obviously it's stopping a service from earning revenue from these additional users. But also, you can see that that to detect this kind of behavior, looking at multiple authentication stages, over a period of time, looking at different IP addresses or potentially ISPs also authenticating with the same credentials, or even actually possibly different geographies. It could be that someone is a business traveler and their home account is being used abroad, or it could mean that set of credentials has been shared, and it's another person in a different geo bypassing your content restrictions and bypassing your geo restrictions, gaining access to that content. So there's also the tamperer, and this is someone we classify as where session data has kind of indicated that potentially someone is trying to either reverse engineer the code of the player to override licensing restrictions or geo restrictions or playback restrictions, or it could be something slightly darker, that they're inspecting token information that's used for authentication and trying to extract keys. And this kind of user, it's difficult to track, but if you have detailed logging from your playback environment, you have detailed logging from your security systems, whether that be your licensing services, your CDN, etc., authentication services, and you're looking at patterns, it is possible to detect relatively easily that something is slightly awry. It could be a token replay, and essentially a single token is being tried against your authentication service again, indicating that someone has intercepted that token and is then trying to reuse it to authenticate.
So there is a lot at stake, content, revenue, and brand, and protecting these starts with implementing a full content protection strategy that includes DRM, player protection, watermarking, and user monitoring. Only then can you make sure that your players from end to end are as trustworthy as the technology you've implemented. So do check out the 4th article of How to Trust Your Player for more detail on the topics we've discussed today. If you want more in-depth analysis on the various watermarking technologies for subscriber-level protections, not just our own, you can request our Attacks on Subscriber Watermarking Technologies white paper, which covers bitstream modification, AB variant, and client-composited solutions, with information on attack vectors and recommendations, guidance around deployment architectures, and factors you need to consider. Also look out for our 5th and closing article in our series in coming weeks, as well as a webinar which is on November the 18th. As always, we're also keen to hear your views on this topic, so please do get in touch. And thank you, Andy and Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.